Fantasy football championships are not simply won in the draft. Getting the players on your team is one thing, but you have to know roster management. And a huge part of knowing what guys to play and what guys to fade is injuries. And we've got a ton in NFL Week 6. So stay tuned for the NFL Week 6 Injury Report. Welcome, football fans, to another edition of IDP Plus. What is up, folks? I'm your host, the DGen Doc, and as always with me, typically, we're talking injuries. We have a ton to get to. Look, if this is your first time joining us, welcome, cheers, but this is the NFL Week 6 Injury Report. And if you're new to this show, look, I know you've probably seen some other injury report type things. Well, this is a little bit different because the offense and the fantasy football, offensive guys always get the limelight. But we're going to do things differently. We're going to put the defense first. This is more of an IDP center show. And if you are a fan of IDP Plus, that probably makes you happy. However, it's not just for defense. I'm going to focus on defense, go in-depth analysis, some of the biggest injuries. I will do an offensive injury rundown at the end because I know if you're likely playing IDP, you're probably playing fantasy football with some offense as well. So I'm going to hit the biggest names in the injury report for NFL Week 6. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get rolling because we have a ton to get through here. Okay, going to start with ones that you probably already know a little bit about because they're playing here in just a little bit. Probably won't be able to get this out before kickoff, but Eagles linebacker Nakobe Dean is active tonight for the first time this season. He is coming off a patellar tendon tear. A major injury to your patellar tendon is what connects, ultimately from your quad, but it goes from your kneecap to your shin bone there. That is called your patellar tendon. It is kind of a pulley for the quad. Major injury. When it is torn, it requires surgery. As you see here, they repaired it. You have to relearn how to walk. It's similar to an ACL, but the recovery timeline is a little bit shorter, typically more 8 to 10 months instead of that 10 to 12 months. However, 1 year after, the outcomes are not the greatest, so I expect a slow ramp up from Nakobe Dean. He also has a situation where rookie linebacker Jahad Campbell has looked like a stud. So is there enough room out there? You're not going to take Zach Bond out the field, and you're probably not going to take Jahad Campbell off the field. I know the Eagles, they're talking about potentially could we move Jahad Campbell to edge and let Nakobe Dean go back there. One, Dean's coming off a major injury, and two, I don't think you want to stunt your young linebacker's growth. So we'll see how many snaps Dean gets tonight. I'm excited to see him back out there, but I'm not. For the Eagles is defensive tackle Jalen Carter. Popped up on the injury report late this week, and he's been inactive, so obviously you probably know he's not playing tonight. Now, the good news is it's not deemed to be a long-term injury. So it seems like something minor. Heel is a bit of an interesting one. Are we talking something Achilles tendonitis? Are we talking something plantar fasciitis? Is it just a bruise of the heel? Heel doesn't really tell me much exactly what he's dealing with. One to monitor, but the expectation is this, he's going to come off this mini bye week from Thursday, should have plenty of time to rest it. So at this point, based on what's been reported, I'm expecting him to be out there, but obviously huge player in the IDP space, huge player to this Eagles defense. So this is one we're going to continue to monitor. All right, moving on for guys that more relevant for this week as I'm getting this published here. Let's start with another great defensive tackle, and that's Jeffrey Simmons for the Tennessee Titans. Gave us a little bit of an injury scare. No practice yesterday on Wednesday, but he did return to practice in a limited fashion today on Thursday. So the expectation is he's good to go. He's a guy who finished the week last week. He finished the game. So typically if a player finishes the game, I'm usually more optimistic on their outlook. So even though, he took some rest and obviously was sore, as we see some guys do, the fact that he returned to practice today, fairly optimistic he's going to be good to go and be able to be productive out there as really one of the only pieces of that Tennessee defensive line. Now they do go up against a bad Raiders team who has almost an equally bad offensive line. So this might be a good spot for Simmons to, get some TFLs, some tackles, and hopefully some sacks on Geno Smith, a guy who's maybe he's a little bit weary to throw the ball because he's throwing so many interceptions. All right, Some good news as well. Talking about ankle injuries, this is New York Jets defensive end Jermaine Johnson finally back at practice after he picked up an injury week 1. He's been out multiple weeks here. Now, going on to this 5th week of the injury. Finally back at practice in a limited fashion, but a legit shot to play in London. Now, they just kind of labeled this as an ankle injury, didn't really tell us, but the fact that he's been out so long tells me it's more of the E version or high ankle sprain types, which we've talked about high ankle sprains before. Not your typical ankle sprain, not when you go to the basketball court and roll your ankle, something pretty easy, 1 or 2 weeks. This is one where high ankle sprain refers to the ligaments between your tibia and your fibula, your 2 lower leg bones. We call them a syndesmosis. It's kind of like a mesh webbing, and they're pretty damn hard to go ahead and injure and damage, meaning it takes more force to damage, which also means it takes more time to recover. Typically, even in minor cases, this is a 4 to 6 week injury. Jermaine Johnson kind of fits right on that timeline. Now, let's see how he looks out there. Typically, more your offensive guys tend to struggle a little bit if they come back, especially too soon. But it's been almost 5 weeks for Johnson. So you can't expect him, assuming he has a full practice tomorrow, you might be able to start him. Now, not the best matchup going against a really good Broncos offensive line. They are going to be missing guard Ben Powers, but Johnson, as we know, plays on the edge. So he's going to be going against 2 pretty damn good offensive tackles there. So he's going to have a tough matchup in his first game back. So might want to put him on the shelf, see how he looks this game. But the good news is he is expected to be back and kind of get into the fold here. All right. Going to some cornerbacks that we're talking about in the Steel City of Pittsburgh. We've got 2 that are unfortunately kind of swapping spaces. And what I mean by this is, one's coming off the injury report and one is looking like he's going to stay on it. Cornerback Joey Porter Jr., the young player out of Penn State, picked up a hamstring injury a couple weeks ago. Now, hamstring injury, you're going to hear me talk about this pretty much every week. One of the most burdensome injuries in the NFL, one of the most common, refers to simply damage to your hamstring muscle. Now, you have 3 hamstring muscles, as you can see here, and there's different grades. That grade just talks about severity of the injury. Grade 1, it's all a sense of how many muscle fibers are tearing. How much of a micro tear is this? So grade 1 is more of that minor tear, typically more of a 1 to 2 week injury recovery time. Grade 2 is more of that moderate type. Hey, we've done a decent amount here. That's more of that 3 to 6 window. And then grade 3 is a full tear, typically requires surgery and a season ending. Now, it is more of kind of a spectrum as opposed to, the muscle doesn't know it's just grade 1, so it's only really 1 to 2 weeks. Like, it's how much percentage-wise of those muscle fibers is torn and how do we kind of respond to rehab. Now, hamstrings are especially annoying because they feel better before they're fully healed, and they have a high re-injury rate, especially in those first 2 weeks after returning to play. Now, Joey Porter Jr. here, he had back-to-back full practices, so not just 1 full practice, but 2, which is always a great sign, and looks like he's going to be back out there. So, he's coming off the bye week, which gives him a little bit of extra time to prepare. Great sign. He had a full practice yesterday coming out, another full practice there. So assuming he continues that trend, he is going to be good to go for Sunday. But his running mate in Jalen Ramsey picked up a hamstring injury going into the bye week in their London game a couple weeks ago. And unfortunately, he's came out of the gate with back-to-back, did not practice. So you got to expect Ramsey to be out there, get at least another week, if not more. Again, we don't really get practice reports over the bye week, so not really sure if this is going to be grade 1 or 2. This is going to be kind of that second week that he's going to be missing, with the bye week being in there. So we'll see about Jalen Ramsey. Might be closer to that grade 2 range where that 3 to 6 window is what pops into mind. All right, another Pittsburgh Steeler coming off a high ankle sprain that we talked about, a little bit more, to come back from than just a regular low ankle sprain. Alex Highsmith, a guy who's been TJ Watt's running mate. Now, the good news for the Steelers is Nick Herbig came back pretty much right as Alex Highsmith was coming out, picking up that injury in, I believe, week 2. He was upgraded to a full practice today and in line to return this week. So he had a limited practice yesterday and then a full practice today on a great progression to make his return. Now, I'm sure he's still going to rotate in with Herbig and Watt, but this is a big kind of step back here against the Browns offensive line that has not been great. They got Jack Conklin back last week and he looked better. And, they traded for Cam Robinson. So the offensive line has improved on the end, but in no way are they world beaters like they once were. They're also going up against a rookie quarterback in Dillon Gabriel, who did good to get rid of the ball last week against the Vikings blitz-happy defense. A little bit more mobile than Joe Flacco, but still you have to like the Steelers' chances here of rattling the rookie quarterback and getting some pressure on him. Moving on to a couple concussions. Concussion is an injury, mild traumatic brain injury is kind of the medical term for it. Still, we know some about concussions, but we don't know everything. It's really a disruption of the energy systems in your brain, and it really affects your decision making and processing time, which we all know in the game of football is crucial. If you go out there and play scared, you go out there and play reactionary, you're likely to get hurt. And this is one thing that, the NFL, usually what happens in the past couple of years is the NFL is very strict in the beginning weeks, and everybody who picks up a concussion does not play for at least one game. However, in the past, a typical recovery timeline was 5 to 7 days. So you would see guys get a concussion and then play that following week. And typically, as we go throughout the season, you'll kind of see that. I'm not going to say they get more lax, but you see more guys returning the week after. Now, we've got a couple interesting cases here. We've got Saints safety Justin Reid, who picked up an injury just last week against my Giants, got ruled out of the game with concussion. But here on Thursday, he was upgraded. So he practiced limited on Wednesday, which is a great sign, typically seeing out of a concussion. And then he upgraded to a full practice today on Thursday. Typically, that Thursday practice is key. If they don't at least return in some way, then they're likely out. You want a full practice by Friday. Justin Reid is even ahead of schedule despite suffering a concussion just a couple days ago. So the fact that he had a full practice today on Thursday, barring any setback, he should be out there. So he may be our first concussion that comes back this season the following week. So we'll have to monitor that and see if the NFL steps in there. But with a full practice, you would expect him, clearly he's responding well to treatment, and he should be out there for Sunday. Now, another one, Miami linebacker Tyrel Dodson, one of the leading tacklers on this team, him and Jordan Brooks, not a good defense, so they've had to make a lot of tackles past the defensive line, but and they've been out there a lot. But he is, I believe, the green dot for this defense. We'll see if Willie Gay steps in for him. He did not practice today. Typically, if you do not practice, at least in a limited fashion, by Thursday, you are basically ruled out, because in order to clear the concussion protocol, there's 5 steps. And the last 2 steps are a limited practice with no symptoms and then a full practice with no symptoms. In very rare cases, usually for quarterbacks, high-profile guys, they've done a simulated Saturday practice and cleared them. But I would not expect this for Tyrel Dodson. I would expect him to take the normal course we've seen, and he is, not going to be playing on Sunday and be out this first week after a concussion. Now moving along, we've got New England Patriots cornerback Christian Gonzalez, who returned to the field, last week. Looked great, played a huge role in that win against the Buffalo Bills. Now he popped up on the injury report as limited today with a hamstring, which is immediately Spidey senses kind of red flag. What's going on here? Did he suffer a setback? Well, reading more into it, according to Vrabel and what they're saying, is this was a pre-planned kind of focus more on rehab day. I think he went through the stretches and a little bit of individual stuff and then went back into the rehab facility. So limited on practice, but the expectation is he still plays, and this was more of a pre-planned kind of maintenance day. Let's see tomorrow if he makes sure he's out there in full and ready to go. But the expectation at this point, again, what Vrabel said and what all the beat reporters were saying is that this was pre-planned and is not a setback. So Gonzalez should be good to go here. A guy who is hoping to come off IR this week, one of the graphic guys, linebacker Denzel Perryman, suffered a likely high ankle sprain early in the year. He is upgraded to a full participant today, should be back Sunday. So this is similar to the Alex Highsmith case, got injured early in the year, has missed, several weeks. I think this is week 4 or 5 for him that he's been out and trying to rehab. It's been at least 4 weeks since he's coming off the IR. But full practice today means that he's obviously feeling pretty good and is now going to be placed back into that Chargers linebacking core next to Deion Henley. They're playing against the Miami Dolphins this week, who, We'll see what that offense is going to look like. Obviously, no Tyreek Hill, but they did put up a decent amount of points against Carolina Panthers and did run a lot of drives. Now, of course, they collapsed and lost that game, but this Chargers defense has looked a little bit middling of late, dropping a game to my Giants and then to the Commanders, kind of getting blown out by the Commanders. So they're hoping to look to bounce back, and Perryman is a key piece of that defense. So I do expect him to be out there Sunday. We'll see how he looks, but the full practice is a optimistic sign for him that he's feeling pretty good. Now we're going over to Detroit to talk about a couple of their secondary pieces here. We're talking about Terrion Arnold. Now, he is a guy who has been dealing with this shoulder issue for multiple weeks here. He's been kind of in and out of the lineup. He'd get hurt and come out, and then he'd play the next week. And then he comes out and he gets kind of carted off. And there's this optimistic, he's searching for second opinions, which always means surgery's on the table. But actually, the second opinion said that he doesn't need surgery. And he's going to be out for a couple weeks, but he's expected to return within a month. So, just kind of using some context clues here, obviously knowing it's the shoulder joint. I'm thinking this is potentially some type of shoulder subluxation, some type of maybe, hey, the shoulder's been popping in and out, which usually kind of destroys our labrum there. Now, as we've seen with guys like Xavier and Tyrone Tracy, who's going to play tonight for the Giants, sometimes you can rehab it enough that you don't need surgery. Now, after the season, he will likely get surgery and get things repaired in that labrum and kind of tighten some things down. But typically, as long as it's not a quarterback with their throwing shoulder, most guys are kind of, if it's not bad enough, able to play through it. So it sounds like, the first medical opinion was, hey, you've had this happen a couple times. I recommend you go ahead and get the surgery and shut it down for the year. And clearly the second medical opinion had a differing opinion and said, I think you can rehab this and get back here with a month and continue to play. So it sounds like that's what he's going to try to do. Do not expect him out this week, but hopefully in the next couple weeks, he'll be out there. Another one is safety Kerby Joseph, who popped up with a knee injury, has not practiced in back-to-back days. So this is one where the injury is, not reported to be long-term or anything like that. He still has a shot to play, but really that practice status tomorrow is going to be huge here. So if you're hoping of rolling Kerby Joseph out into your lineups, you need to be paying attention to if he's practices tomorrow, because if he does not practice tomorrow, you got to find a pivot there. So just putting that in your ear. A guy who came back, and unfortunately it was too soon here. Matt Milano with his pec injury looks to be a re-injury there. Now, we use this picture to talk about pec injuries. This is not Matt Milano, but this is just kind of showing you, obviously this is a full pec tear. I don't think Milano's would be because he would need surgery. He came back and played after a couple weeks of being out, but he aggravated that injury. And they play on Monday night, so this is their first, practice report being Thursday. Did not practice today, which is not a good sign. Already aggravated an injury and likely going to be out this game Monday night against the Atlanta Falcons. They just signed Braylon Spector kind of off the street. They brought him back to kind of bolster up this linebacking core. Expect Shaq Thompson to get some of those reps again, but I would not expect Milano this week or potentially not for a couple weeks with that aggravation of the pec. Because when we talk about aggravation, what that means is the muscle was not appropriately at the point where it could handle that stress, right? So it was still damaged to a certain extent. And now you aggravated it and already damaged muscle. That's not something we typically bounce back from very quickly, nor is it something you want to send him back out there just to keep re-injuring it. At this point, the Bills have playoff aspirations. They want their linebacker back, for the home stretch. And let's be honest, their schedule is pretty damn easy at this point. All right, couple more to round us out here. Good news that we're going to try to end with. I'll get the bad news out of the way, and then we'll finish with two good news. Quarterback Devon Witherspoon, he's been in and out of the lineup, dealing with this knee injury. Thought he was back, then he missed last week, and now he's not practicing 2 times in a row for this week and looking like he's very much in doubt for this game against game against Jacksonville, the other Florida team. He had reports were that he was getting an MRI to kind of figure out what's going on. This still is kind of ominous and bringing some red flags to me, as like it's clearly something's going on, but the team doesn't really know because they haven't really said anything. And the fact that he was trying to play and then he was kind of surprisingly out, and then he went to get an MRI like weeks after he's had this injury. So nothing official has been reported. But with 2 back-to-back no practices and all this kind of ominous, like getting an MRI and whatever, I'm not expecting him out this week, and we may want to prepare for him to be out for several weeks. So very curious to see what happens with Witherspoon, but I think with the no practices, having to get the MRI, definitely not going to be in play for this week. All right, as I said, let's end with some good news. First off, Falcons cornerback AJ Terrell, he's been out several weeks dealing with the hamstring injury. Coming off the bye week, he was back at practice today in a limited fashion, and the man said himself, I will be playing on Monday night. So sometimes you want to take that with a grain of salt, but it's been several weeks. He started the week with a limited practice. He still got 2 more practices, and they play on Monday night. So I think there is a very good chance we see AJ Terrell back out there, which is huge. Buffalo Bills don't have the best wide receiver core, so getting your best cover guy to make sure you shut those guys down, force them, whether it's going to be through the run or Josh Allen running around making things happen. That is a big boost for an Atlanta Falcons defense that has been pretty damn impressive this year so far. So we know that Josh Allen sometimes can turn the ball over, especially if he's trying to force things. So this is an interesting one where Terrell comes back and solidifies that back end, and we'll see if that pass rush can get home against Josh Allen. All right, last one, and a huge one for any Ravens fans or anybody who is lucky enough to grab this man in IDP. Kyle Hamilton, the all-stud safety, dealing with that groin injury. We've talked about groins before. Essentially, an umbrella term that refers to both muscles of the lower abdomen and your inner hip or your adductor muscles. So muscles that connect to that pelvis there. That's kind of what the groin is. Upgraded to a full practice today after being a limited practice yesterday. He missed 1 game last week as he got injured in practice and kind of dealt with obviously a mild groin strain there. But he's definitely in line to be back for Sunday, and they're going to need him going up against the Rams offense with Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams. We'll see if Higbee's out there, Tutu Atwell, some of those guys, Kyron Williams. This Ravens defense is a mess. No Kyle Van Noy returned, but Roquan Smith is not practiced. He's unlikely to be out there. Matabuke is done for the season. Marlon Humphrey popped up today after no practice yesterday with a limited practice. He was expected to be out until after the bye. They got their bye week next week. So we'll see if they hold him out. He might be back, which would be big for them. But again, Kyle Hamilton is the quarterback of that secondary. He is in on a lot of plays. He's all over the field. He's a playmaker, so someone you always want in your lineup, and especially with him trending towards being healthy and active, you're definitely going to plan to have Kyle Hamilton out there, whether it's going to be a ton of tackles or he can get Stafford to make a mistake or punch a ball out. You got to have Kyle Hamilton in your lineup when he's out there. All right, that is the defensive injury report. Now, if you're just an IDP guy, it's the time you can either plug your earmuffs, or get out of here. But we're going to do a quick offensive rundown, as I promised. The biggest names kind of hitting the wave tops here. And let's go ahead and do it. So QB Lamar Jackson, no practice again this week. It's doubtful, way more doubtful than questionable. The expectation is they hold him out for the bye. After the bye, they'll look to bring him back. Potentially Snoop Huntley starting, not Cooper Rush, because Cooper Rush looked really bad last week. Another quarterback, Kyler Murray, back-to-back no practices. He finished the game, though. He left the game with that foot sprain, foot injury, whatever, they haven't officially said what it is, just foot injury. Got kind of looked at, came back in the game and looked okay, finished the game, and then he starts the week with 2 back-to-back no practices. Now, he's not a guy, quarterbacks don't need to practice a ton before they get out there. Like if he returns to practice tomorrow, he can definitely play. But even if he plays, he's going to be limited. So have some caution there against the Colts defense that has been playing really well. Wide receiver Terry McLaurin still not at practice to start the week, which is not a good sign. However, it is just a Thursday practice, but it seems like there's not a ton of optimism here based on the reports around it. One you want to monitor because he still does have 2 practices left with it just them playing on Monday night. So we'll see. But right now, not looking good for Terry McLaurin. Is looking good for Jauan Jennings, though. With the ankle and rib injury, he's been beat up all year. He returned to practice today in a limited fashion, is expected to try to give it a go on Sunday. But he likely will have Mac Jones throwing him the ball, as Brock Purdy did not practice for a second straight day. Even after having the mini bye week of Thursday, the fact that he's not out there and practicing pretty much rules him out. Kyle Shanahan said he suffered a setback and an aggravation of that injury coming off the game he did play in a couple weeks ago, so I would not expect him out there. Same for George Kittle. Expected to return to practice next week, but is still on the IR for this week. And then Ricky Pearsall also not practicing, dealing with the PCL injuries. Those injuries really suck and take a while for guys to come back. So do not expect Kittle, Pearsall, or Purdy to be out there. Neither CeeDee Lamb nor Chuba Hubbard. CeeDee Lamb dealing with the high ankle, still not at practice. He seems close, but I don't think he's going to be ready for this week. And then Chuba Hubbard as well out there. Both of them were working off to the side, but not officially practicing. As of Thursday, typically if a guy doesn't practice at all, even in a limited fashion, that means they're usually going to be out for Sunday. Look for Rico Dowdle to have a revenge game after a monster 200-yard game last week for Carolina as he plays the Cowboys this week. And then Xavier Worthy, a guy who's been playing through, got the weird ankle injury last week and then dealing with the dislocated shoulder. He didn't practice today after a full practice yesterday. Now, I'm leaning that this is more precautionary, but we really haven't got much of anything from Mandy Reid or the beat reporters of what's going on here. He finished the game on Monday, which is always a good sign. He was banged up, but unless there was some type of re-injury in practice yesterday, which was not reported, I think this might just be a situation where they're just trying to get him some rest before they play on Sunday night. So one you definitely want to watch closely, but I think Worthy is going to be out there. And then finally, Tampa Bay. They're still winning, although they got all their guys out. But Bucky Irving, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, none of them were at practice today, which is not a good sign. Sounds like Evans and Irving are at least a week away. And then Chris Godwin, after playing 2 weeks in a row, popping up with a fibula injury is never a good sign, especially for a guy who had to have 2 surgeries on the ankle. They didn't say which side, but I'm assuming it is to that side where the fibula would have been affected. That's one to watch. Not really a good sign. Obviously, Emeka Buka has been great for them. They're going to be paying a 49ers defense our team that's very beat up as well, but don't expect at least 2, if not all 3 of those Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, folks, that is it for the NFL Week 6 injury report. As always, the best way to get up-to-date injury information from me is to go ahead and give me a follow at X at the DGenDoc. If you have questions, feel free to drop guys down here in the comments of the YouTube channel. I'll do my best to get to them. But honestly, just reaching out to me on X is probably the way to go to make sure it gets taken care of. You guys have seemed to be liking the format, so I'm going to continue to roll with it. Obviously, open to suggestions. This is the first year, so any likes, comments, any subscribes, anything you do to show some love, very much appreciate it. And I'm going to go watch my Giants try not to embarrass themselves too much against the Eagles tonight. So let's see if the G-Men can get it done, and let's hope that use this injury information to get some W's in your fantasy football streets this week. From the DGenDoc here at IDP Plus, I am out of here.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.